Hey Venture, I'm Schelli Testimony. I've had the opportunity to meet so many of you, and I get to share a little bit of my story. Diving right in, I'd like to roll back the clock 9 years. I'm 25 years old. I've been married to my husband John for 5 years. We met at youth group. He was moving the chairs and I started to help him, and I just really wanted to spend time with him, and that became a relationship, which became a marriage, which became one of the most important partnerships of things I've been able to walk through in my life. 5 years into our marriage, we had our little girl. We waited 5 years because we were always going to buy a jet ski. We thought we had to do that before having a kid, but then we had a kid and we never bought a jet ski, and honestly, we never missed it. Carrington was born in September of 2011. She was this bright light, and it was like she was the cherry on top. Suddenly, I was a mom. I can't explain to you what being a mom was like. I just know that I all of a sudden was one. I don't really remember not being one. John was so incredibly proud. That first Christmas, he held her up to the tree. I was taking picture after picture after picture. And I just remember thinking, there's no more perfect moment than the one that I'm in. I got to be a stay-at-home mom, which I still get to be, but back then it was so exciting, so new, so fresh. I loved my identity in being a mom. I loved my identity in being a wife. I loved using my crock pot and figuring out new ways to make it so that I could be on the floor playing with Carrington. Sometimes I'd put her in the bouncer right around the time that John was getting home, and she would have a little note in her lap that said, "Hi, Daddy." And life was good. We had a house, we had a truck, we had a car. I had a little Volkswagen Beetle that I really miss, unless it's wintertime, and then I don't really miss it. And we were doing well. We were doing well financially, spiritually. We were really plugged into our home church. Carrington had friends in the nursery, as much friends as you could be, just being a 6-month-old. Life was good. I don't know if I could have planned it better. I don't think I would have wanted to. We were in such a good place. John switched jobs. He was a truck driver. In fact, if you ask his mom, he tried to rent a backhoe when he was 11 years old. He almost got it, but he was absolutely in love with trucks. And he was switching from one job to another, and this one required that he work nights. Over several weeks, he didn't look quite right. He started losing weight, and he looked a little gray. We chalked it up to poor nutrition. It's really hard to eat when you all of a sudden change your sleeping habits. We chalked it up to his sleep cycle being disrupted. Oftentimes, Carrington and I would leave during the day just so he could sleep. Then the bloody noses started, and I remember telling him, "You should go see a doctor." And he said, it's okay, I just have a few more weeks till the health insurance kicks in. I started wondering if maybe he had pneumonia. And then, wives, you'll hear me out when I say that I pulled the wife card, and I sort of guilted him into it. I told him, I said, "Well, what if you're contagious? You could get Carrington sick." That Tuesday, right before he went to work, he was standing at the counter. And then he was laying on the floor. He completely passed out. I thought he'd had a heart attack because he clasped like this right before he fell. Unbeknownst to me, when John came to, all he saw was me running away. I was going to call 911. He got up and he said, I pass out and you run away. I was trying to help. We were young newlyweds still, so I'm sure some of you can understand. I told him, I said, "You absolutely have to go to the doctor. Passing out and losing weight and looking gray and bloody noses, they're just not normal." John was mid-30s. He was the healthiest person that I knew. John had never smoked a cigarette. He never drank a sip of alcohol. He grew up on an organic farm, and he was raised on goat's milk, a goat that he had like a personal relationship with. So he was about as healthy as a person could get, except he drank Mountain Dew. And so he said he'd go. He still went to work that night, and I wish that he hadn't. He came to on the highway going 21 miles an hour. Thankfully, he hadn't used cruise control, and God protected him. I could have woken up that morning to a sheriff at my door, and he could have hurt somebody else in the process. But what I did wake up to was a call from John. He told me that he had gone into the quick care, and they pulled his labs, and they immediately wheeled him to the oncology floor. He was disoriented. He told me, he said, it's no big deal. I'm just gonna go to the oncology floor, something with my blood. I knew well enough to know something with the blood in oncology most likely meant leukemia. And so I packed a bag. Packed a bag for Carrington and I, knowing that we would most likely not come home for a while, and we didn't. We ended up living in a corner room at the hospital because our house had some issues and wasn't the healthiest place to be traveling back and forth with him having a compromised immune system. And so we lived in the corner room, room 614. They put up a cot, and I wheeled my 10-month-old around the halls of a hospital at night and slept on a cot next to her and nursed. And we heard the diagnosis, leukemia. John had pre-B cell ALL, and some of those who have a medical history will know that that's a really unusual cancer for a man in his 30s to have, a healthy man at that. I was told that he was so healthy and so strong that he would breeze through chemo. And so we started chemo in September of 2011. Carrington wasn't even 1. 10 days into chemo, John's body completely shut down. It systematically shut down from the kidneys to the liver. He had pneumonia that went sepsis, and he was swelled up and about the color of a mac and cheese crayon. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. The doctor called me on a Wednesday. I had left and was staying with my mom so that Carrington wouldn't wake him up at night. The doctor said, if there's any family that would like to see John, they should come in now. I said, come in now? And he said, I'm not entirely sure that John is gonna make it. I flew to the hospital. I knew it was serious, but it all seemed really crazy. Crazy that it was happening. Crazy that just 10 days prior, my life looked very different. My expectations of my life looked very different. In fact, I was kind of on cruise control. Things were good. Things made sense. But all of a sudden they didn't. 2 days later, our amazing oncologist was sitting there trying to explain to me the seriousness of the situation. Dr. Martin looked me in the eye and he said, I need you to understand how very, very serious this is. John is not going to make it. He is not going to make it out of this. I thought his body could make it, but he can't. I said, no, absolutely not. Like, we're praying for God to heal, and God will heal John. Absolutely, 100%. And he said, I don't want to take that away from you. I don't want to take that hope away from you. But when he dies, do you want us to resuscitate him? What a quiet room. What a tough moment. And as a believer, it was a very tough moment because I was walking within this duality of knowing that there was hope on both sides. But I was so clinging to the hope on this one. That night in the family room that was down the hall, it had the ugliest orange pleather chairs. I was praying to God. I said, God, if you let me keep him, we will never stop telling people of your goodness. We will spend every moment of every day telling people what you've done and who you are. And then a part of me broke. And I said, but even if you don't, I will never stop telling people who you are. I will never stop telling people what you've done and that you're good. And I cried. That night, we were praying around John. We had realized that Carrington, our goal was to dedicate her for her 1-year birthday in front of our church. But we weren't going to see that according to some of the brightest minds in the hospital. So while praying over him and singing over him, we decided this was the moment. While singing over him, I heard one male voice and another male voice and a female voice. And pretty soon it was a chorus of people. They were singing along. It was our pastors and their wives. And our little girl was put on his chest. And right there in the hospital in room 614, with a freak diagnosis, a couple weeks removed from the best days of our life, he dedicated our daughter to the Lord. And we did it as a family. That night, to all of our surprise, he mustered the energy to push himself to the side of the bed, walk to the door, and shake his brother's hand. The next day, he walked a little further, and a little further after that. Before long, 3 or 4 days, he'd walked the whole length of the hospital floor. And we cheered. We cheered for him. We cheered for God. Because when there was no hope, when we had been thrown the ultimate curveball, God saw it from up above. The occupational therapist told me that it would be beneficial to play classical music for him. So I took that as blast the Rocky soundtrack over and over. I like to think that God used that to help heal him. It reminded him that he was in a fight and that God was going to give him the strength for this particular fight, for the hope that we'd hoped for this side of heaven. John made a complete and absolute miraculous recovery in 2012. Carrington saw her very first birthday in the halls of a hospital, and her dad was able to attend. In fact, that was his first sunset that he was able to see in 6 weeks because of the way his other hospital room had faced. God is not without proving himself, because John had a biopsy on a Tuesday that showed a completely failed liver, and by Wednesday, it was radically improved. To this day, Dr. Martin and the staff around will say that they've never seen anything like it. That Christmas for us was an absolute gift, as Carrington tore through all of the packages in front of her dad, who had graduated from physical therapy. He completed a year's worth of physical therapy in 6 weeks. God restored him in every way possible. And you would think that that's where the story ended. But for me in particular, it's not. We enjoyed 7 months of healing. Our rallying cry, as I blogged and shared pictures, as John spoke to groups, was God hears and God heals. And God heard and God did. For 7 months, we got to live as a normal family. We got to have wonderful firsts. God restored the things that had been lost. John was ready to get back to work. He was in full remission. The doctors had suggested more chemo, and John had chosen to enjoy his time in remission, and he would handle that if need be. And need be came in June of 2013. It was Father's Day weekend. John didn't look right again. We had just moved out into our own little place after living with my parents for about 6 months. John was looking for work. He had resumes out, and we found out that he had relapsed. The tough part about his relapse was that I sat at a keyboard trying to explain to the thousands of people who had prayed for his healing alongside us that our story wasn't over and that it didn't entirely make any sense. I remember putting my head down and saying to God, God, I don't want to tell you how to run your business, but I think you really blew it. When I asked you to heal John, I meant forever. God, in his loving response to me, did not seem as worried as I did. In fact, he met me with the love and compassion that he meets so many who are confused. I knew that God would love me through this just as he loved me through the family room when I had just completely offered the fork in the road up to God, knowing that he was going to meet me no matter what. I wrote and I told the thousands of people who'd been praying for us and with us that John had relapsed. I believed that we would meet this with the same intensity as we had the first time, and that we would just pray for healing and that it would happen again. But John's cancer came back very different. In fact, the first time he had 1 genetic mutation, and the second time he had 7. We couldn't kill it fast enough. John did several more rounds of chemo throughout that summer. It was a very aggressive treatment, including it was so tough on his body that he actually ended up having a heart attack. After he had the heart attack, it really became about quality of life, not quantity. We recognized that every single moment we had was precious. That's when I realized that this would look very different than the last time. Our first time through was very much about the non-believers. They came to know us and fell in love with our daughter. We got to have relationships with them and talk to them about Jesus. And when God performed his miracle in John's body, they were stunned. We were stunned. God was glorified. The second time through was very much for the believers, because they got to see our faith as we walked it out and see that God was the same God in both situations. In November of 2013, after realizing and accepting that John was terminal, John and I went on a drive after one of his infusions to help keep his blood balanced so that he would feel well enough for the days ahead. He told me that he had had a dream, and when he woke up, he was disappointed to find that he wasn't there. He told me that he was heartbroken at the idea of leaving Carrington and I here on earth. But he found himself so excited at the future because heaven was real, and it's so real to us. And then, in a moment that was so much like mine in that family room, he said, if God can use my death greater than he can use my healing, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. And so, we met the holidays again. Just as grateful as we had been the last, but so different. We woke up that Christmas to a quiet house, just the 3 of us. I carried Carrington out and sat her by her dad, who hurt too much to participate, but he smiled the whole time as she played with her gifts. That night, I helped him get settled in bed, and we heard carolers outside our door. Good friends of ours. What's John's favorite song? He said it was Go Tell It on the Mountain that Jesus Christ was born. John's life spoke that. People watched his faith walked out. The next day, we went to hospice. The Christmas decorations were still up. The trees were still lit. This was not what I was expecting. That first Christmas that I took pictures of John helping Carrington put ornaments on the tree. This was not how I had planned my life. But here we were. And 19 days later, John went to be with Jesus. God did amazing things through John's healing, both on earth and in heaven. At John's memorial, 11 people gave their lives to Jesus, and countless have heard the gospel through his life, through his illness, and through his eternal life in heaven. My story did not stop there. In so many ways, John went to heaven and has grown and evolved and changed, and I know that. I look forward to meeting him someday and hearing about what he's experiencing there. I was here experiencing things as well. I wish I could say after those curved balls it all got easy. Many times in life it comes in waves. I've had great moments, I've had rough moments, but now as I look at this holiday season, I have an amazing husband, Brian. Many of you guys have gotten to meet him. God has given us a seamless connection. He and Carrington were meant to be. In fact, when he was in Afghanistan, I was having Carrington, and he never knew that he was going to be a dad at that moment, but I'm so glad that he is at this moment. Together we have Briar. God has given me a beautiful family, not once, but twice, and an amazing story to tell. The story's painful. Even thinking back on those Christmases, I can think to the heartache and the despair, asking God why, and knowing no answer would seem good enough. But what I'm able to tell people is that no matter what your situation is or what the outcome is going to be, because I've walked those two roads, I've asked for healing and seen it here on earth. I've prayed for healing, and I know that it was granted in heaven, but not here on earth. But God was the same. God was faithful. God is faithful. God was there with me in those moments. God's with me now. There's never a moment too big. There's never a surprise too great. There's never a curveball God can't handle. Thank you.